He was a king in a world of his own, making a titan of industry whose net worth was discussed in the same hushed tones as a nation's GDP. She was a ghost, a woman serving $100 entrees with 1,000-yard eyes, hiding a brilliant mind behind a cheap apron and a polite smile. On a rain-slicked New York night in a restaurant, dripping with legacy and wealth, their worlds collided. It started with a joke, a casual piece of cruelty, from a man who had everything aimed at a woman who had nothing. "If you're so smart," he sneered, then translated. He expected silence. He expected fear. He got a revelation that would shatter his world and unearth a secret buried for years. The air in Ethelgard's was thick with the scent of old money and new ambition. It clung to the velvet drapes settled in the plush burgundy carpets and perfumed the conversations that buzzed like expensive machinery between the linen-draped tables. Warehouses stood like sleeping giants, their windows boarded up like closed eyes, and the streets held the memories of tougher times. It was in this Eastern District Precinct 4 that Officer Jake Miller and his partner worked. Jake's partner wasn't human. He was Thor, a magnificent 3-year-old German shepherd with a sable coat the color of a stormy sky, and eyes so intelligent they seemed to hold ancient secrets. He was a product of the finest German breeding lines, a marvel of genetics and training, but to Jake he was simply Thor. He was the anchor in the churning sea of Jake's life. Jake Miller at 34 looked older than his years. A subtle tension lined his eyes, a souvenir from 2 tours in Afghanistan. He'd come home from the dust and chaos of Kandahar, looking for peace, for structure. He found it first in the quiet routine of patrol work, and then profoundly in the K-9 Academy. The city was slick with a relentless July downpour, and the wealthy patrons of the Upper East Side had flooded Ethelgard seeking refuge and reaffirmation of their status. Every table was a constellation of power, but none burned brighter or with more cold, hard light than Table 7. Table 7 was the domain of Rhys Covington. Even seated Rhys Covington radiated an aura of impatient authority. He was a man chiseled from ambition and ruthlessness, the CEO of Covington Global Holdings, a private equity behemoth that swallowed companies whole and spat out profits. His face, handsome in a severe predatory way, was a permanent mask of faint disdain. He didn't speak to the staff. He issued decrees. With him were 2 men who orbited him like nervous moons. Jeffrey, a young, impeccably dressed junior executive whose sycophancy was almost an art form, and Leonard Porter Covington's chief legal counsel. Leonard was older, with a placid grandfatherly face that belied a mind like a steel trap, a mind that had served the Covington Empire for 2 decades. Audrey had been assigned their section. Her stomach tightened as she approached. Serving men like Rhys Covington was like walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers. They didn't see a person. They saw a function. Any deviation, any human flaw was an excuse for sport. "The 98 Latour," Rhys stated without looking up from his phone as Audrey arrived. Not "we would like" or "could we please have." It was a command. "An excellent choice, sir." Audrey said, her voice a practiced, neutral monotone. Jeffrey snickered. He knows. He bought the vineyard last year. Rhys waved a dismissive hand, not at Audrey, but at Jeffrey, silencing him. The message was clear. I don't need you to broadcast my power. It speaks for itself. Throughout the appetizer course, the conversation at Table 7 was a brutal ballet of corporate warfare. They spoke of hostile takeovers, of leveraging debt, of trimming the fat, which Audrey knew meant gutting employee pensions and shuttering factories. The main topic was their latest target, a struggling but innovative tech firm called Phoenix Dynamics. Their intellectual property portfolio is a mess, Leonard said, dabbing his lips with a napkin. Disorganized, poorly protected. But the core technology, it's revolutionary, a new form of data encryption. The founder, a man named Aris Thorne, was a genius, but a terrible businessman. Reese mused, swirling his wine. Died a few years back. His board is running the company into the ground. They're desperate. We'll get it for pennies on the dollar. Audrey felt a familiar, bitter pang. Genius and terrible business. It was the story of her own father, Dr. Alaric Davenport, a man whose brilliance had been his undoing. She pushed the thought away, focusing on clearing their plates. Stay invisible. Stay safe. The evening wore on. The main courses were served and devoured. The wine flowed. The talk grew louder, more self-congratulatory. As Audrey arrived to offer the dessert menu, Reese was unwrapping a small, velvet-lined box that had been delivered to the table by a courier. Inside was not a piece of jewelry or a watch, but a small clay tablet no larger than a smartphone. It was covered in dense, wedge-shaped markings. Cuneiform, but not the clean academic script one saw in museums. This was rough ancient, and etched into the clay with a desperate-looking hand. "This is it," Reese said, a flicker of genuine excitement in his eyes. "The Ashurbanipal artifact." Geoffrey leaned in his face, a mask of awe. "The one from the dig site in Syria, the one that supposedly belonged to the lost library. The very same." Reese said, his voice laced with pride. "Our acquisition of Phoenix Dynamics hinges on a small clause in their founding charter. It references a patent precursor, something Aris Thorne based his entire encryption algorithm on. He was an amateur historian obsessed with ancient codes. The rumor is the key to unlocking the full potential of his tech isn't in a computer. It's on this." Leonard Porter looked skeptical. "Reese, the legal team thinks this is a wild goose chase. We can secure the company without chasing mythical treasure maps." "Myth is just history we haven't verified yet, Leonard," Reese retorted, his good mood souring. Thorne's notes were explicit. The Serpent's Key unlocks the Lion's prize. Our analysts believe the Serpent's Key is a code name for the decryption sequence hidden on this tablet. If we can translate it, we don't just own Phoenix Dynamics' current tech. We own the next generation of it. It's the difference between a $100 million acquisition and a $10 billion empire. He pushed the tablet to the center of the table. "I sent images to 3 of the top epigraphers in the world. They're stumped. They say it's a late-period Akkadian dialect, but with significant anomalies. A localized patois, perhaps, or even a deliberate cipher. They need weeks, maybe months," he scoffed. "Useless academics." It was then that he noticed Audrey. She was standing perfectly still, her tray held at her side, her eyes fixed on the tablet. For a fraction of a second, the mask of the invisible waitress had slipped. He saw not a tired server, but a flicker of intense analytical concentration. It was the look of a scholar, a code breaker. And Reese Covington, a man who had built his fortune on reading people, noticed the shift. He decided to have some fun. A cruel, mocking smile spread across his face. He leaned back in his chair, gesturing grandly towards the artifact. "What's the matter, sweetheart?" He drawled, his voice loud enough for the nearby tables to turn their heads. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Don't tell me our little waitress fancies herself a historian." Geoffrey snickered on cue. Leonard looked mildly embarrassed. Audrey blinked the mask, snapping back into place. "My apologies, sir. I was just admiring the piece. I'll bring the dessert menus." She turned to leave, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Stupid, stupid, stupid," she screamed at herself. You stared, you broke cover. But Reese wasn't done. He enjoyed this, the casual exercise of power, the public humiliation of someone he deemed insignificant. "Oh, no, no. "Don't rush off," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You seemed so interested. You're an educated woman, I'm sure. Maybe you took a class at community college. Go on." He gestured again at the tablet. "If you're so smart, then translate it." The words hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. Laughter rippled from Geoffrey. A few patrons at other tables smirked, enjoying the floor show. Mr. Dubois, the restaurant manager, began moving towards their table, his face a thundercloud of disapproval at the disturbance. For Audrey, the world narrowed to a single point, the tablet on the table. It wasn't just Akkadian. He was right. The academics were right. It was a bastardized dialect infused with loan words from neighboring Hurrian and Proto-Aramaic influences. It was a cipher designed to be read only by someone who understood not just the words, but the cultural and linguistic crossroads from which they sprang. It was exactly the kind of puzzle her father had adored, the kind of puzzle he had taught her to solve before she could ride a bicycle. Her blood ran cold, then hot. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to walk away, to mumble an apology, to retreat back into the shadows where she was safe. Revealing what she knew was a risk she couldn't afford. It could unravel the careful, anonymous life she had built. It could lead them to her. But in that moment, something else took over. It was the years of biting her tongue, of hiding her intellect, of letting men like Rhys Covington look through her as if she were made of glass. It was the insult so public and so demeaning. It was the memory of her father's brilliance and the rage at how the world had crushed it. She stopped. She turned back to the table, her spine straightening. The practiced deferential server Narok 12 vanished, replaced by the ghost of Meliora Davenport. She met Rhys Covington's mocking gaze with an unnerving calm. Her own eyes, usually downcast and tired, were suddenly sharp and clear, like chips of ice. "It is not a direct message," she said, her voice low, but carrying a new resonant authority that silenced the table. "It is a bipartite riddle. A kenning." Rhys's smile faltered. He exchanged a quick, confused glance with Leonard. Audrey took a half-step closer, her eyes scanning the cuneiform markings, as if she were reading a grocery list. "The first part reads," she began, her voice steady, "Batusha Serpa Salu." She paused, translating the ancient words into fluid, poetic English, "Where the serpent of silver sleeps." She continued, her finger tracing the air above the tablet. "Ina libishu shaneshu kusso." Her translation followed instantly. "In its heart, the lion's throne." She looked up directly at Rhys. "Washbu ishata ulapat." She held his gaze, her voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more powerful than a shout. "Weights touched by a fire that does not burn." Silence. A thick, profound silence descended upon table 7. Geoffrey's jaw was slack. Leonard Porter had frozen mid-sip of his water, his eyes wide with disbelief. And Rhys Covington, the billionaire titan, the king of his own universe, just stared. The mocking smirk was gone, wiped clean from his face. It was replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. His face was pale, his mouth slightly agape. He looked at the tablet, then back at the waitress who had just, in perfect nuance translation, recited the cryptic words that held the key to his $10 billion empire. He was utterly, completely frozen. In that moment, he wasn't a king. He was just a man who had kicked what he thought was a stray dog, only to find it was a sleeping tiger. And it was now wide awake. The silence stretched thin and fragile for what felt like an eternity. The ambient buzz of the restaurant seemed to fade into a distant hum. Mr. Dubois, who had been striding over to diffuse the situation, stopped dead in his tracks, sensing a shift in the power dynamic He couldn't comprehend. Audrey stood her ground, her adrenaline-fueled courage beginning to recede, replaced by a cold wave of dread. What have I done? The question pounded in her skull. She had just painted a giant glowing target on her own back. It was Leonard Porter who broke the spell. He carefully placed his water glass down the small clink against the saucer, sounding like a gunshot in the quiet. He looked at Audrey, his grandfatherly expression replaced by one of sharp, forensic scrutiny. "How?" he asked, his voice low and raspy. "How did you do that?" Before Audrey could formulate a response, a lie, a deflection, anything, Rhys Covington finally moved. He blinked slowly, as if coming out of a trance. He leaned forward, his eyes, which had previously held only disdain for her, were now alight with a predatory, obsessive intensity. The mockery was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous: calculation. "Who are you?" he demanded. His voice was no longer a public drawl, but a sharp private command. I'm your waitress, sir." Audrey stammered, the fear making her voice tremble. She took a step back, clutching her empty tray like a shield. "My name is Audrey Cole." "No," Rhys said, shaking his head slowly. "That's your name. That's not who you are. Waitresses in this city do not moonlight as experts in obscure Akkadian dialects. So I'll ask you again. Who are you?" She had to escape. Now. "If you'll excuse me, sir, I have other tables." She turned, but Rhys's voice stopped her again, cold and hard as steel. "You're not going anywhere." He looked past her to the bewildered Mr. Dubois. "You, manager. Her shift is over. I'm paying her salary for the night, and for the inconvenience." He pulled a thick stainless steel money clip from his pocket, peeled off 5 $100 bills, and tossed them onto a nearby empty table. "Send her back here, without the apron." Mr. Dubois, utterly flummoxed, but recognizing the scent of power and money he was trained to obey, simply nodded. "As you wish, Mr. Covington." He looked at Audrey, his expression a mixture of confusion and awe. "Cole, you heard the man. Trapped." There was no other word for it. Arguing would only create a bigger scene, drawing more attention she couldn't afford. Defeated Audrey walked back to the staff area on legs that felt like jelly. Her colleagues stared as she untied her apron and hung it on its hook for the last time. She knew with a sinking certainty that she could never work here again. Her invisibility was shattered. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic beating of her heart. She was no longer server Jacques de 12. She had to be Meliora Davenport again, at least on the inside. She had to be strategic. She had to control the narrative. When she returned to table 7, the dirty dishes had been cleared away. The tablet was still in the center of the table, a malevolent little idol. Rhys had dismissed Geoffrey, who had scurried away like a chastised puppy. Only he and Leonard remained. Rhys gestured to the chair Geoffrey had vacated. "Sit," he commanded. Audrey remained standing. "I'd prefer not to." A flicker of annoyance crossed Rhys's face, but he didn't press the issue. He was recalibrating his approach. The bully had failed. Now the negotiator was emerging. "Ms. Cole," he began, his tone now dangerously smooth, "you possess a very unique, very valuable skill. A skill I am in desperate need of. I am prepared to be extremely generous." "I'm not for hire, Mr. Covington," she said, her voice firmer now. "I'm a waitress. What you saw was a party trick. I took some history classes in college. I got lucky." Leonard Porter let out a soft, dry chuckle. "My dear, I've worked with the world's leading academics. They don't get lucky with bipartite riddles in a dialect that has baffled Oxford. What you did was not luck, it was fluency." "Look," Audrey said, her desperation mounting, "I don't know what you want from me. I translated your rock. That's it. I want to go home. Rhys leaned back, steepling his fingers. He studied her, his eyes missing nothing, the worn-out soles of her sensible shoes, the faint ink stain on her index finger, the way her posture was ramrod straight, despite the exhaustion etched on her face. "Let's be clear," he said softly. "Where the serpent of silver sleeps in its heart, the lion's throne waits, touched by a fire that does not burn." That isn't a translation. It's a key. A very elegant, very poetic key. "My people," he gestured vaguely to the world outside the restaurant, "believe the serpent of silver refers to a specific server architecture Phoenix Dynamics designed but never implemented. A dormant project. The lion's throne would be the master control, the root access, and touched by a fire that does not burn." He smiled a thin, humorless line. "That sounds a hell of a lot like a cold fusion power source, something the tech world has been chasing for 50 years. Aris Thorne was rumored to have cracked it before he died. Every word he spoke sent a fresh wave of panic through Audrey. He wasn't just a brute, he was intelligent, dangerously so. He was connecting dots she hadn't even realized were on the same page. "This is all very fascinating, Mr. Covington, but it has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with you," he countered, leaning forward again, his intensity pinning her in place. "Because that riddle isn't the whole message, is it? It's just the first stanza. There's more on that tablet, and you are going to translate it for me." "No." The word was out before she could stop it. Rhys raised an eyebrow. "No, no," she repeated, finding a sliver of strength. "I won't." He stared at her for a long moment, then a slow, cold smile spread across his face. It was far more chilling than his earlier mockery. "Ms. Audrey Cole." He said the name sounding like a verdict. 27 years old according to the restaurant's employment records. Social Security number issued 5 years ago. No credit history before that. No driver's license. No social media presence. No digital footprint whatsoever. You live in a 5th-floor walk-up in the Bronx, under a name that for all intents and purposes didn't exist until half a decade ago. Audrey's blood ran cold. He had already started digging. Of course he had. While she was changing out of her uniform, he had likely had a team of digital bloodhounds searching for her. "You're a ghost," Rhys continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And ghosts have secrets. Ghosts are usually hiding from something. Now I can be the man who helps you stay hidden. I can provide resources, protection, a new life, so airtight nobody would ever find you. Or," he let the word hang in the air, "I can be the man who shines a very, very bright light on you. I can find out who you really are and who you're hiding from, and I can assure you my resources for finding things are unparalleled. So you'll work for me one way or another. The only variable is whether you do it willingly and become a very wealthy woman, or you do it unwillingly while your past comes crashing down around you." It was a checkmate. He had laid it out with surgical precision. He had found her single greatest weakness, her hidden past, and placed it in a vice. Leonard Porter watched the exchange with a quiet, impassive expression, his role now that of a silent witness. Audrey felt the floor drop out from beneath her. The carefully constructed walls of her anonymous life were crumbling. 5 years of living in the shadows of constant low-grade fear, all undone by a single moment of pride in an overpriced restaurant. She looked at the tablet, then at the 2 powerful men staring at her, waiting for her surrender. She had no choice, but if she was going to go down this rabbit hole, she wouldn't do it on her knees. "Fine," she said, her voice brittle. "I'll look at your tablet, but not here." She needed to control the environment to gain some semblance of leverage. And not on your terms. Reese looked amused. Oh, you're in a position to make demands. I'm the only one on this continent who can give you what you want in the time frame you need. She shot back the fire, returning to her voice. That gives me leverage. So here are my terms. I'm not your employee. I'm a consultant. You will pay me a fee. A significant one. $250,000. Half up front. Leonard coughed, choking on his water. Reese just smiled. He appreciated audacity. Done, he said, without hesitation. You will provide me with a secure location to work. Not your office. A neutral space. And I'll need resources. Access to the Beinecke Library's digital archives, at Yale the Bodleians at Oxford. I'll give you a list. Consider it done. And finally, she said, her gaze locking onto his, you will stop digging into my life. Your people, your bloodhounds, you call them off. My past is my own, and it is not part of this transaction. You agree to that, or the deal is off, and you can wait 6 months for your academics to maybe give you an answer. Reese studied her for a long moment, a genuine grudging respect dawning in his eyes. He had tried to bully her, and she had buckled. He had threatened her, and now she was fighting back with his own weapons negotiation and leverage. He extended a hand across the table. You have a deal, Miss Cole. Audrey looked at his outstretched hand, the hand of a man who could build empires and ruin lives with a single phone call. Shaking it felt like making a deal with the devil, but she was out of options. She took his hand. His grip was firm, cold, and electric. It was the closing of a deal and the beginning of a terrifying new chapter she knew she might not survive. Get some rest, Miss, Cole, Reese said, releasing her hand and rising from the table. Leonard will be in touch tomorrow with the wire transfer confirmation and the location details. Your new life begins in the morning. As he and Leonard walked out of the silent restaurant, leaving her alone at the table with the ancient clay tablet, Audrey sank into the chair, her legs finally giving out. She stared at the cuneiform, the wedge-shaped marks that had just sealed her fate. Where the serpent of silver sleeps. She had a terrible sinking feeling that she had just voluntarily walked into the serpent's den. The neutral space was a penthouse suite at the Mandarin Oriental overlooking Central Park. It was less of an office and more of a gilded cage, a 3,000-square-foot monument to sterile luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows displayed a god's-eye view of the city, but they didn't open. The air was recycled, the silence absolute. A sleek, state-of-the-art workstation had been set up on a massive mahogany desk, already logged in to the university library archives she had requested. The clay tablet sat under a specialized lamp, its ancient markings looking starkly out of place amidst the modern technology. Leonard Porter had met her in the lobby, handed her a keycard, and informed her that a man named Frank would be stationed in the hallway outside. For your security, Leonard had said with his placid smile. Audrey knew it was a lie. Frank wasn't a bodyguard, he was a guard. The wire transfer had cleared. $125,000 sat in the bank account she had opened under the name Audrey Cole, an account that had never held more than a few thousand before. It felt like blood money. For 2 days, Audrey worked, or rather she pretended to work. She knew Reese Covington was not a man who honored his promises when they became inconvenient. His vow to stop digging into her past was worthless. He was testing her, giving her the illusion of control, while his hunters undoubtedly worked in the shadows. So she gave them a show. She spent hours hunched over the tablet, cross-referencing symbols with the digital archives, muttering to herself, filling yellow legal pads with notes and dead-end translations. She made it look like a difficult, painstaking process. In reality, She had deciphered the rest of the inscription within the first hour. Her father had taught her that the most complex ciphers weren't just about language, they were about mindset. To crack Aris Thorne's code, she had to think like him. He wasn't just using an old dialect, he was using its numerological and astrological conventions, something no modern epigrapher would ever consider. Each cuneiform symbol had a corresponding numerical value and a celestial association. It wasn't just a message, it was a multi-layered equation. The full inscription was chillingly brilliant. Where the serpent of silver sleeps in its heart, the lion's throne waits, touched by a fire that does not burn. Follow the 3 sons of the scorpion to the river of dust. There, the 7th shadow reveals the unbreakable gate. It was a roadmap. The 3 sons of the scorpion likely referred to the 3 brightest stars in the constellation Scorpius. The river of dust was a poetic term for the Milky Way. It was an astronomical alignment, a specific time and date. The 7th shadow and the unbreakable gate were likely server names or password protocols. She had the key. She just needed the context of Phoenix Dynamics' internal network to understand it. But she couldn't give it to Rhys. Not yet. Her life depended on holding that information back. It was her only piece of leverage, her only shield. Meanwhile, in his own steel and glass tower, downtown, Rhys Covington was growing impatient. "What do you mean she doesn't exist?" he barked into his phone. He was pacing his office, a cavernous space with a view that dwarfed the one from Audrey's suite. On the other end of the line was Frank Miller, not the hulking guard outside Audrey's door, but Rhys's top private investigator. Miller was a legend in the corporate espionage world, a man who could find a grain of sand in a desert. And he was failing. "I mean exactly that, Rhys," Miller's gravelly voice replied. "The name Audrey Cole, the social security number, they're synthetic, a ghost kit and a damn good one, professionally created. There's no birth certificate, no school records, no medical history. Before 5 years ago, she's a complete blank. Whoever she was before she had the resources and know-how to erase herself." "But you found something," Rhys pressed. "You always find something." There was a pause. A whisper. When the SSN was generated, there was a corresponding flagged exit in a federal database. A request for a death certificate for a 1 Meliora Davenport. The request was processed, but the certificate was never officially issued. It was buried. Smells like a favor from someone high up. Davenport. The name was vaguely familiar to Rhys. Davenport Innovations. The same, Miller confirmed. Tech R&D firm. Went bankrupt about 5 years ago, right around the time Audrey Cole appeared. The founder, Dr. Alaric Davenport, a certified genius in linguistics and theoretical physics, died in a lab accident. Massive fire. His only daughter, Meliora, was also presumed dead. Body was never recovered from the wreckage. She was 22. Rhys stood still, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. Meliora Davenport. She was an academic prodigy, wasn't she, linguistics? Won the Lowell Grant at MIT at 19, Miller said. Specialized in dead languages and computational syntax. She'd be 27 now, same age as our Audrey Cole. Rhys felt a cold thrill. It was her, the heiress to a fallen tech empire, a presumed dead genius, was hiding in plain sight serving him wine. The story was more insane, more perfect than he could have imagined. But why keep digging? Rhys commanded. I want to know everything about the Davenport Innovations bankruptcy. I want to know about the fire. I want to know who her father's enemies were. Tear it all apart. He hung up the phone, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. He had her. Meliora Davenport. The knowledge was a weapon, and he couldn't wait to use it. He strode over to his desk and buzzed his secretary. "Get Leonard Porter in here, now." Audrey knew they were closing in. She could feel it. The way Frank the guard looked at her had changed. It was less watchful, more knowing. The charade had to end. She needed to make her move. She spent the third day compiling her findings. She wrote out a meticulous 20-page report detailing the linguistic complexities of the tablet, citing obscure academic sources, and providing a provisional translation of the first stanza, the one she had already given them. She made it look like a monumental effort of scholarship. Then she began to lay her own traps. Using a series of public Wi-Fi relays and anonymizing software her father had designed years ago, she sent a single encrypted email from a burner account. It contained no text, only a single audio file of her voice reciting the first line of the riddle, "Where the serpent of silver sleeps." The recipient was a name deep in the MIT faculty directory, Professor Adrian Croft, her father's closest friend, his mentor, and the only person in the world who knew she was still alive. It was a distress signal, a call to arms. That evening, the knock on her door was expected. It wasn't Frank the guard. It was Rhys Covington, and he was alone. He walked in without waiting for an invitation, his presence sucking all the air out of the room. He didn't look at her work on the desk. He looked directly at her. "The performance is over," he said, his voice quiet. "You can drop the act." Audrey's heart hammered, but she kept her face a calm, cool mask. "I don't know what you're talking about. I've been working as per our agreement. I have a preliminary report for you." "Oh, I'm sure you do," he said, walking closer. "A very thorough, very professional report. But we both know you solved this puzzle days ago." He stopped a few feet from her. "It's a beautiful story, really. A fallen princess in hiding. The world thinks you're dead, burned to ashes with your father's legacy." Audrey didn't flinch, but inside she was screaming. He knew. "It must have been terrible," he continued, his voice taking on a tone of mock sympathy. "Losing everything. Your father, your company, your name." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. Then he delivered the killing blow. "Tell me, Meliora, is being a waitress really so much better?" The name, her real name, hit her like a physical blow. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The carefully constructed persona of Audrey Cole shattered into a million pieces at her feet. She was exposed, vulnerable. She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw the real woman behind the mask. He saw the fear, yes, but underneath it, a deep, burning intelligence and a core of hardened steel. "What do you want, Rhys?" she asked, her voice raspy. She didn't bother denying it. There was no point. "The truth," he said, his eyes gleaming. "All of it. The full translation and the story of why Meliora Davenport had to die." She laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." "Try me," he challenged. She took a deep breath, the storyteller, the linguist, taking over. "My father wasn't just a businessman. He was a purist. He believed technology should liberate, not control. Davenport Innovations was on the verge of a breakthrough, the same one Aris Thorne was chasing, a new form of decentralized, unhackable data encryption. It would have made government and corporate surveillance obsolete. It would have changed the world. "A noble goal," Rhys said, his voice dripping with cynicism, "and one that doesn't pay the bills. It would have—" She countered, her voice rising with passion. "But certain people didn't want that future. They wanted control. They wanted a back door. Our biggest competitor, a shell corporation, made a play for us. My father refused their offers. He wouldn't sell. He wouldn't compromise. She looked away towards the sterile view of the park. Then the accidents started. Data breaches, sabotaged prototypes, a smear campaign in the financial press. Our investors got spooked and pulled out. We were hemorrhaging money. The pressure was immense. Her voice dropped to a whisper. The night of the fire, he had called me. He was excited. He said he'd found a way to protect the work, to hide it in plain sight. He said our family's oldest friend, our lawyer, was coming over to help him finalize the documentation. He told me to stay at my university library and wait for his call. The memory was so vivid she could smell the smoke. The call never came. Instead, I saw the news report. A catastrophic lab fire. 2 bodies presumed inside. My father and his lawyer. Reese went still. His lawyer, who was his lawyer. Audrey looked him dead in the eye. A man my father trusted with his life. A man he'd known since childhood. A man who now sits on your board and advises you on your acquisitions. She let the silence stretch. His name, she said, her voice laced with 5 years of venom, is Leonard Porter. The name landed in the silent penthouse suite with the force of a physical impact. Reese Covington, a man who prided himself on being unshockable, took an involuntary step back. His mind reeled, refusing to process the accusation. Leonard Porter. He said the name, a statement of disbelief. No, that's impossible. Leonard has been with my family for 30 years. He's the most loyal man I know. Was he loyal? Meliora shot back, her voice sharp as glass. Or was he just patient? She walked over to the desk, her movements now filled with a desperate energy. My father created a private encryption system called the Rosetta Protocol. It didn't just encrypt data, it fragmented it, hiding pieces inside other files as linguistic anomalies. You could have the whole hard drive and never see the hidden information unless you had the key the specific linguistic patterns to look for. She pointed at the clay tablet. Aris Thorne was my father's only student. That riddle is the master key for the Rosetta Protocol. My father gave it to him for safekeeping, a failsafe in case anything happened. Reese listened, a cold dread seeping into his bones. He connected the dots, the Phoenix Dynamics acquisition, the disorganized intellectual property Leonard had mentioned. Leonard himself had steered Reese away from the wild goose chase of the tablet. Leonard was there the night of the fire. Meliora continued, her voice trembling with repressed fury. The news report said he died with my father. They found just enough to issue a death certificate. But it was a lie. He faked his death after murdering my father. He set the fire to destroy the evidence, stole what research he could, and then vanished only to resurface later with you. He buried his past to hide his crimes. I buried mine to survive. The full scale of the deception slammed into Reese. He wasn't the predator. He was the tool. Leonard was using Covington Global as a billion-dollar crowbar. Phoenix Dynamics. Reese said, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. Their encryption tech. It's a version of your father's work. A pale imitation, she corrected. Thorne never had the final protocol. What Phoenix has is the lock. The real prize, my father's complete revolutionary work, the Lion's prize, is dormant inside their servers hidden. Leonard knows it's there. He's been playing the long game for 5 years. He drove Phoenix to the brink of bankruptcy so that you would acquire them. He planned to use your resources to get inside, find the master server, and use the key from this tablet to unlock everything. Once he had that technology, he could vanish, leaving Reese with the hollowed-out shell of a company. The betrayal was absolute, a calculated move against his family, his empire and his intelligence. My investigator found a whisper of my death certificate being buried by a federal contact, Meliora added. It must have been one of Leonard's old contacts. After the fire, I knew he would come for me. Next, the only other person who knew about the protocol. I ran. I contacted Professor Adrian Croft at MIT, my father's most trusted friend. He's the one who helped me disappear, who created Audrey Cole. The name jolted Reese's memory. Professor Croft, I sent him images of the tablet. Meliora's eyes widened. What did he say? He confirmed the dialect, but called it a cipher that would take months to solve. Reese recalled. Then another detail surfaced. He mentioned a lost prodigy of Alaric Davenport's who could have solved it instantly. He was talking about you. He was protecting you. He was warning me, Meliora whispered, understanding dawning. The penthouse, once a prison, now felt like the command center of a war. The two of them, the ruthless billionaire and the fugitive genius, were no longer captor and captive. They were allies bound by the treachery of a common enemy. Reese's shock had burned away, replaced by a chilling focus. He looked at Meliora, and for the first time he truly saw her. The respect in his eyes was genuine. Meliora Davenport, he said, using her real name not as a weapon, but as an acknowledgement. It seems your days of hiding are over. It's time to take back what's yours. The fight was no longer just about business. It was personal. Leonard Porter had betrayed the deepest code of loyalty, and Reese was going to make him pay. For Meliora, it was about justice for her father and reclaiming the future that had been stolen from her. The riddle is still incomplete, she said, her focus returning to the tablet. Follow the 3 sons of the Scorpion to the River of Dust. There the 7th shadow reveals the unbreakable gate. It's astronomical and technical. I can't decipher it without access to Phoenix's network architecture and server logs. Reese was already pulling out his phone. He dialed a number. Get me a full schematic of Phoenix Dynamics' internal network, he commanded, his voice cold and clipped. Server names access protocol's firewall logs for the last 5 years. I don't care how you get it. I want it within the hour. He hung up without waiting for a reply. He looked at Meliora, his expression a mask of grim determination. The unlikely duo was united against the grandfatherly monster who had orchestrated their collision. The final act was about to begin. The hour that followed was a storm of focused energy, a torrent of encrypted data server schematics firewall logs, archived communications from Phoenix Dynamics flowed into the penthouse. Reese, having orchestrated the data theft with a single brutal command, now stood back and watched the true artist work. The tired waitress was gone, replaced by a virtuoso. Meliora's fingers flew across the keyboard, her eyes scanning lines of code as if they were prose. She worked with a speed and intensity that was breathtaking. There, she said suddenly, pointing to a firewall log. The astronomical alignment, the 3 sons of the Scorpion to the River of Dust. It wasn't a prophecy. It was a date stamp. 4 years, 8 months, and 12 days ago. The system report called it a power surge, but it was the activation of the Rosetta Protocol. It was the moment my father's work went dormant. She pulled up another file, a list of server names. And here, the 7th shadow. It isn't a server. It's a user account. Shadow 7, a ghost account created by Aris Thorne. And the unbreakable gate. She trailed off her mind, racing through memories of the eccentric Aris Thorne, her father's protege. His obsession with history, with myths. The Library of Alexandria, she whispered. He called its destruction a fire that burned knowledge, not paper. She looked at Reese, her eyes wide with discovery. the last line of the riddle, touched by a fire that does not burn. It was never about cold fusion. It was Iris's poetic signature. It's the password. Rhys felt a genuine chill. The elegance of it, the layers of meaning. It was a level of intellect he rarely encountered. "So, we have everything," he said. "The location, the user, the password." "We have the key to the vault," Meliora confirmed. "Now we just have to stop the thief before he gets there." The plan they formulated was audacious. The acquisition meeting was at 9 a.m. in the main boardroom of Covington Global. Leonard would be there, expecting to celebrate the victory that was secretly his alone. The next morning, the boardroom was buzzing. The Phoenix Dynamics board members looked relieved to be saved from bankruptcy. Rhys sat at the head of the table, the picture of a conquering CEO. To his right sat Leonard Porter, his face a placid mask of professional satisfaction. The sight of his calm, treacherous face made Rhys's blood run cold. Contracts were signed. Hands were shaken. In the midst of the celebratory applause, Leonard leaned over to Rhys. "A brilliant victory, Rhys," he murmured. "Alaric Davenport would be spinning in his grave if he knew his greatest rival's work now belonged to us." The casual cruelty was all the confirmation Rhys needed. "I need to oversee the systems integration myself," Leonard continued smoothly. "I'll be in the tech suite for the rest of the day." "Of course, Leonard," Rhys said, his voice dangerously even. "Do what you have to do." As Leonard left, Rhys caught the eye of his head of security, who gave a subtle nod. Leonard was being tailed. Rhys returned to his office, where a large monitor mirrored the screen of the computer Leonard was using. On another screen was a live video call with Meliora, back in the penthouse, her own workstation ready. "He's in," she said, her voice tight with tension. They watched as Leonard, using his new admin access, began methodically searching the Phoenix network. He searched for server names containing lion or throne, growing increasingly frustrated as he hit dead end after dead end. "He's trapped in his own linear thinking," Rhys muttered with disgust. "Now," Meliora said. With a few keystrokes, she made a single isolated directory visible on Leonard's system. It was labeled with a single cuneiform symbol, the symbol for throne. Leonard froze. He clicked on it. The directory held one encrypted file, the Lion's Prize, and a password field. They watched as he pulled out his own photos of the tablet and began typing variations of the riddle. Each attempt met with a flashing, "Access denied." In the tech suite, Leonard was starting to sweat. "He's trapped," Rhys said with grim satisfaction. "Let's close the cage." He strode back into the boardroom where the executives were still celebrating. "Gentlemen," he announced, his voice cutting through the chatter, "there's one final detail of this acquisition I'd like to share." The screens on the boardroom wall flickered to life, showing a split-screen view, the file directory, a live feed of a frantic Leonard in the tech suite, and the calm, focused face of Meliora. The room fell silent. "Leonard!" Rhys's voice boomed from a speaker in the tech suite, making the old lawyer jump. "Having some trouble." Leonard stared at the hidden camera, his face draining of all color. He was caught. "What you're looking for. Leonard isn't on any server you can find." Rhys's voice echoed through both rooms. "You need a better translator." On the main screen, Meliora's face became the central image. She looked directly into a camera. "Hello, Leonard," she said, her voice clear and cold as ice. "It's been a long time." If Leonard had seen a ghost, he could not have been more horrified. His jaw dropped. A strangled, gurgling sound escaped his throat. "See Meliora," he stammered. You're dead." "No," she replied, her voice ringing with the power of justice, 5 years delayed. "I survived, unlike my father." In front of the stunned board members, Meliora began to type. The password, "touched by a fire that does not burn," appeared in the field on the shared screen. She hit enter. The file decrypted. It wasn't a data protocol. It was a video. Alaric Davenport's last testament. On the screen, Meliora's father appeared, speaking into his webcam on the night he died. "If you are seeing this," Alaric's voice filled the room, "it means I am likely gone. I have discovered a terrible betrayal. My oldest friend, Leonard Porter, has been selling my research to our competitors. He is here now, he says, to help me. But I see the truth in his eyes. I am hiding this recording using the Rosetta Protocol. Meliora, if you see this, know that I love you. Be strong. Finish my work." The video ended. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Every eye turned from the screen to the live feed of Leonard Porter, who had collapsed into his chair, a broken, defeated man. Security quietly entered the tech suite, and his long reign of deceit was over. The serpent was slain. The lion's prize wasn't a piece of technology, it was the truth. In the aftermath, the world shifted. Davenport Innovations was reborn from the ashes of Phoenix Dynamics, helmed by Meliora Davenport, and backed by the full force of Reese Covington's capital. The company was finally poised to release the technology her father had dreamed of. Reese was a changed man, humbled by a lesson not in finance, but in humanity. His respect for Meliora was immense, a partnership forged in a crucible of betrayal and discovery. Weeks later, Meliora stood with Reese on the balcony of her new office, the former penthouse suite. It was no longer a cage, but a command center. "You know," Reese said, looking out at the city, "I never apologized." Meliora smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile he had never seen on the face of Audrey Cole. "You don't need to." "No, I do," he insisted, turning to her. "I was arrogant, cruel. I saw a waitress, not a person. I was wrong." "You were," she agreed softly. "But if you hadn't been, I might still be hiding. In a way, your arrogance was the fire that does not burn. It didn't destroy me. It revealed me." He looked at her, the brilliant, resilient woman who had outsmarted them all. The waitress who had frozen him in shock and in doing so had woken him up. Their journey had started with a sneer, but it had ended in a shared future, one built not on a hostile takeover, but on mutual, hard-won respect. In the end, it wasn't about the billions of dollars or the revolutionary technology. It was about the hidden value within us all. Meliora Davenport's story is a powerful reminder that we should never, ever judge a person by their job, their clothes, or their circumstances. A mind that can change the world might be hidden behind a waitress's apron. Courage might be found in the quietest person in the room, and sometimes it takes being knocked off your throne to finally see the world clearly. Reese Covington learned that lesson. He went looking for a corporate prize and found something infinitely more valuable: humility, and a partner whose worth couldn't be measured in dollars. What do you think? Have you ever completely misjudged someone only to be stunned by who they truly were? Share your own stories in the comments below. If you were moved by Meliora's incredible journey from the shadows back into the light, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that our true potential is always waiting to be unlocked. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell for more real-life stories that prove the most extraordinary people are often hiding in the most ordinary places. Thank you for watching.